So you know TV tropes, right? That wiki-style website that informally documents the conventions of fiction? Well, one of the most well-known and dominant entries is an umbrella term known as the Scrappy, a term so wide-reaching that the site had to create the Scrappy Index, which lists over 140 concepts and character archetypes, all centered around one fact, that the Scrappy is a character who has received a level of dislike so immeasurably strong that they've garnered the exact opposite of a fandom. They have a hate-dom. People hate them a lot. And it's all named after one enthusiastic talking cartoon puppy from the 1970s. That's kinda weird, right? Since its inception, the Scooby Doo franchise has become, and continued to be, the most popular and long-lasting Hanna-Barbera cartoon of that era, with constant reinventions, reboots, revivals, and reruns, including a recent theatrically or on-demanded released feature film, in addition to all of its ongoing direct-to-video movies and TV shows, ensuring that Scooby-Doo didn't and doesn't belong to just one generation of children. The characters have solved mysteries with people in elaborate ghost costumes, they've battled real monsters and demons and immortal Cajun cat people, they've met Batman and Kiss and crossed over with everything from Johnny Bravo.
My glasses! I can't see without my glasses!
My glasses! I can't be seen without my glasses!
To WrestleMania, to Supernatural. They've gone on a trans-dimensional spanning mission to save the world from an evil Lovecraftian cosmic horror derived from Babylonian mythology and fought Nazi robots with machine guns for a Scooby snack. I love Scooby-Doo, you guys. But it's also host to one of the single most widely despised characters in the history of all media.
Hi, I'm Scrappy-Doo! Scrappy-Doo?
As evidenced in David Hofstede's book, What Were They Thinking? The 100 Dumbest Events in Television History, in the chapter Scrappy-Doo, he says, "It's one of the few universal truths left in our capricious and constant world. Everybody hates Scrappy-Doo. Scrappy has few peers in the role of buzzkill for a beloved franchise. There's Shemp, there's Jar Jar Binks, and there's Scrappy-Doo, and the worst of these is Scrappy." Even Mark Evanier, the co-creator of Scrappy, has said, "I am aware that there are some folks out there who, given the choice of seeing the execution of Osama bin Laden or Scrappy-Doo, would opt for Scrappy and wonder why you even had to ask." Oh boy, is that an understatement. Scrappy's story actually starts at the earliest days of Scooby-Doo Where Are You in 1969. The show was a massive hit initially, but given that the formula of the show was pretty narrow, find a mystery, face a monster, get clues, monster turns out to be a person in a mask, understandably the well was starting to run a little dry fairly quickly. So the first attempt to shake up the formula a bit was with the new Scooby Doo movies in 1972, an hour-long cartoon with guest stars in every single episode, from Don Knotts to Batman and Robin.
Batman and Robin? What are you doing here?
And it was admittedly an obvious marketing ploy, but one that's become such an iconic part of Scooby-Doo that it's been replicated in various movies and shows throughout the years. This concept of adding new characters evolved with the Scooby-Doo show, but the shake-up attempt this time was introducing other characters from Scooby's family, such as Scooby-Dee and Scooby-Dum. That, of course, turned out to be the lead-up to the part we all remember, the creation of his nephew, an adorable good boy puppy named Scrappy-Doo.
Let me at him! Let me at him!
Scrappy was, like his namesake suggested, scrappy and feisty, and in many ways the opposite of his Uncle Scooby, which was a personality trait not present in the either cowardly or otherwise mellow members of Mystery Inc. at the time. Scrappy Daddy Mark Evanier said that Scrappy-Doo's creation was no different than those other marketing and ratings-driven changes. A new character was just a suggestion from studio owner and exec Joe Barbera, just to get ABC to renew the show, and Evanier, who was tasked with writing him in, said, "We would add Scrappy-Doo to the show, and this would make things just fresh enough while still keeping the winning Scooby formula intact." And Barbera himself told Evanier that if this doesn't work, Scooby's dead. And thus Scrappy was birthed in 1979 in the newly renamed Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo.
Uncle Scooby? Hi, I'm Scrappy-Doo!
Scrappy-Doo?
You may have shuddered watching that now if you're a longtime Scooby fan, but at the time, Scrappy was wildly popular, at least for the first few years, and was cited at Hanna-Barbera to be the reason the show was allowed to continue at all. In fact, according to Evanier, people in the offices of Hanna-Barbera even called him a hero. So yeah, Scrappy saved the show just like they wanted. Who's a good boy? You are! Still trying to reinvent to keep the show fresh, the series changed yet again the following season. The series was changed very drastically, split into a 2 comedy shorts format, completely ditching the mysteries with bad guys and masks in favor of wacky misadventures with real supernatural forces. This was mostly done to line up with the shorts format that dominated other Hanna-Barbera productions at the time, but nevertheless, it was coupled with completely eliminating Fred, Daphne, and Velma. This was the first major shakeup, and an understandably controversial change, and all pretty much just to further highlight Scrappy as a prominent character, both in the show and, of course, in merchandising. From there, the show continued to undergo numerous back and forth changes throughout the 80s, all with Scrappy still part of the core cast, if not at the forefront. Sometimes the show kept the comedy short structure, sometimes not, sometimes it paired Scrappy with other characters, and eventually it did another retool to mimic the original format by solving Man and Monster Mask mysteries again, but still without regular appearances from Fred and Velma, with Scrappy instead taking their place to become both a leader and a genius and a master of tech and traps.
We're picking up something on the Spectre detector.
So, you know, the pupper went from being a scrappy wannabe fighter to basically being able to do anything. After 9 years, 160 episodes, and 3 TV movies, Scrappy's tenure ended in 1988, when a pup named Scooby Doo went back to the classic solve fake ghost mysteries formula with the original gang. But it was a prequel comedy with them as kids, pre-Scrappy. That show was also notably the first entry into self-awareness for the franchise.
The answer to this mystery is obvious. Your bike was stolen by that no-good neighborhood bully and thief, Red Herring.
Something very important for its eventual legacy. In fact, the creator of the show, Tom Ruegger, went on to create the likes of Tiny Toon Adventures and Animaniacs, shows known for their sharp criticisms of pop culture and very 90s-esque cynical irony. And you can definitely see this particular brand of self-awareness become an integral part of the DNA of all Scooby properties from here on out.
No.
It's the fisherman. No. It's the ferryman.
Roll.
Maybe it's real.
It's just a little memento of our time together.
Oh, Freddie, a scrapbook. I bet it's filled with wonderful pictures of traps?
From then on, Scrappy was pretty much retired as a character, and it seems reasonable. Introduce a character, keep him while he works, use him in different ways to milk that popularity, then phase him out as he works less. Cool, fair enough. As Evanier put it, he was born during a time at that studio when characters were treated a bit too much as a commodity, and in that context he served his purpose. And every now and then I come across someone, usually someone a lot younger than I am, who absolutely loves Scrappy to pieces. That's great. I don't share the sentiment, but I'm glad to have had a hand in giving those folks something they like. And at the end of the day, he says, Scrappy did exactly what he was supposed to do. He got Scooby Doo renewed for another season. So forgive and forget, right? We as a culture moved on, and this cartoon puppy created by executives was just a silly little blip on the pop culture radar, in the way we make fun of any annoying character that gets phased out when people don't respond well. It's normal. It's fine. We're fine.
Hey, Uncle Brian, let's go check out that noise.
I don't know, Scrappy Brian. Might be better just to stay put.
I'm not afraid. Let me get him. Let me get him. Puppy power! Da-da-da-da-da! Puppy!
I hated Scrappy-Doo. Kill Scrappy.
According to the TV tropes page for the Scrappy, for a character to truly be considered a Scrappy, the audience must not only hate the character, but also believe the character is detracting from the quality of the work as a whole by their presence. It's widely accepted that Scrappy himself encompasses almost every possible characteristic that the Scrappy as a concept could ever possibly have. He was a clear marketing ploy, whose very characterization is abrasive, arrogant, and annoying. He sorta breaks the reality of the show by being able to weirdly talk much better than his uncle.
This box is protected by puppy power.
And once his popularity skyrocketed with little kids, that popularity was beat into the ground regardless of what anyone who'd stuck around with the show for years wanted.
It's Scrappy too.
Overshadowing most of the cast, to the point where Scrappy essentially replaced them and absorbed their personalities. He's also blamed for causing many other shows to add an annoying child or kid-friendly character because he was so popular on his show. So not only did he ruin Scooby Doo, he indirectly ruined other shows too. In the 1999 book Saturday Morning Fever, Timothy and Kevin Burke wrote, "In all of our research and discussions, we have yet to discover a more universally loathed character than Scrappy-Doo. He has a voice that most closely simulated the experience of hearing fingernails dragged across a chalkboard, with the most utterly idiotic slogan of any cartoon character. And it would have been better to cancel the show than keep Scooby alive in this sort of cartoon hell." Most tellingly though, they say, if Scrappy-Doo, or as one poster on alt.society.Generation X called him, the demon bastard puppy, were a real person, he'd have long since been beaten to death with baseball bats by enraged Saturday morning veterans. The late 90s were the real advent of the internet as a place for hardcore fans to discuss pop culture, and one where older Scooby fans could really rally around hating Scrappy, to the point that it became something of an early internet meme, like an anti-Scrappy ribbon banner that was proudly displayed on many Scooby-Doo fan sites starting in 1997 to show solidarity in their hate. This fits with the rise of self-aware and cynical meta-humor of that era.
Are you being sarcastic, dude?
I don't even know anymore.
And coincides with the Scooby-Doo franchise itself moving deeper and deeper into irony, after delving into it with a pup named Scooby-Doo. While Scrappy wasn't appearing in any main shows or movies in the late 90s, he did continue to make a couple of appearances in other media. For example, in a 1997 issue of the DC comic Cartoon Network Presents, Scrappy solves a mystery with a 90s teen who makes it clear that, in-universe, he was a fan of Shaggy and Scooby, but didn't like Scrappy very much. To which Scrappy breaks the fourth wall and says, "I get this a lot from these Gen X guys." But this is pretty much the last vestige of any defense or just remotely nice treatment of Scrappy in an official capacity. In fact, that fourth wall breaking self-awareness actually ends up being more cynically turned against him. Cartoon Network, which was the home to Scooby in the 90s, embraced this, first with one of the oldest Shockwave games on their official website, Scrappy Stinks, a game that's literally about throwing garbage at Scrappy-Doo. Like that's literally it. Have fun, kids! But it was really the very funny 1999 short film The Scooby Doo Project, a parody of the Blair Witch Project, where they started to double down.
I think I hear it again.
Hey again.
Daphne, stop! It's just Scrappy-Doo! I know!
And for a couple of years, Cartoon Network also aired a number of, also very funny, interstitials commenting on Scrappy's hated status.
Oh, why do you think they brought me into the show? Because they needed good acting, and I can't even get a freaking Scrappy Week? I've been busting my hump at this network for years, and I've been here longer than all of you!
The best place for cartoons.
Not for me! Not for me, man!
In fact, a lot of the Cartoon Network's self-awareness seemed to be ramping up for the 2002 live-action film, which features the pretty ingenious reveal that Scrappy was the man-in-the-mask villain all along, a narcissistic, megalomaniacal, and murderous asshole that everyone hates.
You don't have the scrote for this job, Pally! The time has come that you appoint me your unquestioned leader!
Oh god, he's peeing on me!
Screenwriter James Gunn, who came up with the idea of adding Scrappy with his draft of the script, said the reason he included Scrappy was because he gets his comeuppance. I hate Scrappy's guts. We all hate Scrappy's guts. Our whole goal was to destroy Scrappy forever. Meanwhile, Tim Curry was offered a role in the film, but reportedly turned it down specifically because he learned Scrappy-Doo was just going to be in it, not even bothering to read the script. So yeah, despite him having more or less vanished from the actual show for a few years, the idea that he was literally the worst, most despicable character of all time not only persisted, but kinda bubbled over, to the point that the Scooby-Doo franchise itself went on the attack.
There really is a sixth member of the Scooby Gang.
Fred, I thought we weren't supposed to talk about Scrappy.
Wow, I haven't seen...
Look away, Daphne. We all promised each other that we would never speak of him. Not ever.
We don't talk about Scrappy.
It's around this time that Scrappy started completely ceasing to exist in all merchandising. New DVD releases of the 380s TV films and some seasons of the show that featured Scrappy as a main character all either greatly reduced his presence to a bare minimum on trailers, cover art, and summaries, or in some cases, wiped him from existence on the marketing completely.
Scooby-Doo and Shaggy team up with ghoul-chasing ghosts.
Join Scooby-Doo and Shaggy as they solve their latest mystery.
The lone exception to this was in 2015 with Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo's complete first season on DVD. It's probably only because there's just not really a way to hide Scrappy on that. He did surprisingly appear in a supporting role in the 2016 Scooby Apocalypse comics, but as a villain who was more or less unrelated to Scooby. Most recently, the 2019 movie Scooby-Doo and the Curse of the 13th Ghost actually functioned as a continuation and finale to 1985's The 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, which featured the fabulous Vincent Price as a friendly gay wizard, but was also Scrappy's last time as a major character. Even as the film makes numerous loving references to the original series and recaps its events, it still acts like Scrappy doesn't exist, outside of one joke.
I guess the gang's all here.
Except Scrappy.
What's a Scrappy?
What makes this even odder is that the movie does include the return of Flim Flam, a main character created for the 13 Ghosts series who, in addition to being generally inconsequential and forgotten and a weird huckster stereotype, was hated more than Scrappy by even the writers at the time. And history hasn't really been kind to him either.
So tragic. 25 to life is a long stretch, even for a preteen con artist.
Tom Ruger, who co-created the 13 Ghosts show, said, "Who I really couldn't stand was Flim Flam, definitely the product of network focus groups. Flim Flam never worked out. Total drain." And yet here he is getting his redemption 30 years later. Tim Sheridan, writer of the 13 Ghosts film, says that there was an attempt to put Scrappy into the movie, but they decided against it because it would be too cluttered. An understandable concern, except that Flim Flam did get to be included, while Scrappy is considered clutter. What's sort of ironic about all this is that Ruger, who was so instrumental in bringing the brand of cynical meta-humor and self-awareness into the franchise that made it possible to dunk on Scrappy so willingly, says he never actually had a problem with Scrappy, particularly because they'd been messing with Scooby's cast and copious guest stars and cameos for years already, saying, "At least Scrappy brings some energy to the table. He actually does have a personality, even though many find it obnoxious." Despite that, the lesson future Scooby writers seemed to take was just to embrace and engage with the cultural narrative. The people behind Scooby-Doo are showing that they're in on the joke, sure, which is fine. But this joke still persists among the rest of pop culture, which...
I was referring to his new nephew, Punchy Cheek.
Let me at him. Let me at him, Uncle Ace.
You fiend.
Yeah, it's a little weird, isn't it? So stay with me here for a minute. The scapegoat theory, as we know it in sociology, applies to a pattern of intergroup conflict that many societies have gone through. As Psychology Today explains it, it happens when uncomfortable feelings such as anger and insecurity are displaced or redirected onto another, often more vulnerable, person or group. The scapegoats are then persecuted, enabling the scapegoaters to discharge and distract from their negative feelings. Basically, the majority settles on one specific target to blame for problems, like a minority group or any kind of outsider, which usually happens after experiencing prolonged negative experiences. It's why in the history of many countries, harsh economic downturns or tumultuous wars are often directly followed by increased persecution of certain minority groups. According to philosopher René Girard, we developed this function because most large-scale issues are extremely complex and can't be easily solved in one one fell swoop. If there's no one bad guy, then we as a society will collectively turn a single target or group of targets into a scapegoat, becoming the one bad guy to represent all the disparate bad things. According to the theory, social order becomes restored once people feel like they've solved the cause of their problem by removing the scapegoat, even if that leaves the true causes of the problem still in existence for the same problem to build up once again.
No, there's no justice like angry mob justice.
That's all heavy stuff for a video about a cartoon puppy, I know. But you can see elements of this play out in the microcosm of ongoing and franchise fiction, especially in TV, when a series goes through a rocky, poorly received period, and then the blame is placed on one character or a creative head, often a woman or person of color, with the declaration that that one person is directly ruining the show and represents everything wrong with it. And sometimes that person is eventually purged, to everyone's joy, so the show can be quote-unquote good again. Yet, the truth is usually more complicated than that. There's often also changes to the show's structure, or some behind-the-scenes issues, or network pressure because of low ratings, or just a story arc or villain that never really comes together. And in some cases, all of those things also change when the person leaves. So the change may not have even had anything to do with the person, and sometimes nothing else even changes. But since we declared that one person, the scapegoat, to take on all the wrongs of the show, axing them makes the show feel refreshed, and leaves we as fans feeling accomplished, as if we personally purged all the badness, even if little else has actually changed. The Simpsons dealt with this concept in the episode Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie, which featured the creators of the Itchy and Scratchy cartoon responding to failing ratings and general apathy from viewers by refreshing the show with a new character, voiced by Homer and named Poochie.
Adding a new character is often a desperate attempt to boost low ratings.
Yo, how's it hanging, everybody?
Morning, Roy.
The character is conceived as a clear marketing ploy, and one that does work at first, garnering excitement for something new, only for the show to become completely written around how cool Poochie is, and abandoning and changing its entire structure otherwise, to everyone's dismay.
When are they gonna get to the fireworks factory?
Poochie himself wasn't really the problem for the most part, but the way the show had to change around him was. In the end, he's killed off and the show is successful again.
Poochie's dead!
But because it went back to exactly what it was doing before, not changing anything in the end or for the better.
It's back to the basics. Classic Itchy and Scratchy. What else is on?
Mark Evanier says that fans seem to view the pre-Scrappy series as animation that compared favorably with Fantasia, but suddenly when this one character was added, it abruptly turned into a Saturday morning cartoon show. But the real truth is that Scrappy-Doo came into a dying show, effectively saved it from cancellation, established that the structure and concept of the entire franchise could be malleable, and then took the brunt of the blame for all of its later failures, becoming the scapegoat for the many problems the series had, like the often failed attempts to restructure it. And once he was exiled, his departure represented the franchise shedding its worst elements, which helped usher in its resurgence in popularity in the late 90s. Even when the franchise would again venture into real supernatural monsters, it was now doing it with the assurance to audiences that it would be without the part they didn't like. So Scrappy kind of saved the franchise twice, both in his metaphorical birth and not always so metaphorical death, becoming a scapegoat for everything wrong with it and thus allowing it to live on. We wouldn't have Scooby Doo continuing for kids today, showing up with a new show or movie every couple of years if we didn't have Scrappy-Doo. He saved it from cancellation, and then in turn forced a creative resurgence when he stopped working, and even marked a new era that invited lost fans back in once he disappeared, ensuring that Scooby Doo would continue to live on forever. So cool. That makes it all worth it, right? There's obviously nothing wrong with criticizing things, and there's also nothing wrong with having a passionate emotional response. We're all gonna have things we hate in the things we love, and thinking deeply about those things to understand why can be helpful for us, both to learn about ourselves and maybe even help make the thing we love better. But there's a difference between analyzing or finding criticism in something you otherwise enjoy to better understand it, and knowing you hate something from the get-go, but choosing to use criticism as a way to justify how you feel, even if the way you feel might simply be because it's just not for you. And there's just something unsettling about Scooby Doo, a fundamentally fun comedy cartoon for children, having such an immensely close association with the poster child of universal hatred and nerd rage. And after all, scapegoating isn't typically considered a good or healthy thing to do. The Scrappy hate permeated from within the Scooby Doo fandom and has been memeified to a point that the simple idea of Scrappy literally represents seething hatred, something even people who don't particularly care about Scooby-Doo just take at face value and agree with, even feel. And that's weird, right? And despite all that, he is still kind of the best case scenario for memeified hatred of that sort. It's not like hatred of Scrappy has caused society to turn on puppies or whatever, and technically there's not any real people being hurt by it. The voice actors who originated him, Lenny Weinrib and then Don Messick, didn't have their careers affected by him at all. The creators don't care about him and didn't have their careers ruined or get harassed. There's just never been a true target for the anger that exists in real life. Compare that to, as much as I shouldn't bring it up, Star Wars, another children's property with an extremely passionate multi-generational fan base, where not only are some characters targeted with extreme rage and hate, but creators and actors are as well. Actors like Kelly Marie Tran and Daisy Ridley were harassed off of social media, joining the ranks of many women and people of color who tend to be automatically harassed as soon as they join a major franchise. Weird, right? And even before that, you had Jake Lloyd, who retired from acting just a couple of years after his film debut as Anakin Skywalker, attributing it to the bullying and harassment he received because of the role. And recently, Ahmed Best, who played Jar Jar Binks, revealed that facing the never-ending hatred of his character directed at him, and which has continued hurting his career to this day, drove him to nearly commit suicide. There are certainly other cultural and societal issues and nuances involved in those situations too, but it almost always goes the same way. The hate, anger, harassment, and death threats are supposed to be justified because these people are treated like scapegoats by fandom or culture, representative of things that are perceived to be wrong and bad about a beloved franchise, and therefore all the hate and anger is funneled into them.
Let the hate flow through you.
And with social media, that hatred and perception can easily bleed outside of an insular fandom and into the real world, and makes that community just a dumpster fire to be a part of. There's an age-old notion called Catharsis Theory that suggests funneling all of our negative emotions into one target or moment of catharsis is a good thing for our well-being. So theoretically, focusing on one thing you hate and projecting all of your negative feelings from your whole life onto that thing and venting about it or screaming about it online is supposed to make you feel better, like scapegoating for your emotions. But more and more modern studies on whether or not this sort of venting actually helps us have found the idea to be inconclusive at best and harmful at worst. A famous 2002 study, for example, specifically set out to examine the catharsis theory by comparing 3 groups of angry people dealing with their anger differently, one by venting, one by distracting themselves, and the last by doing nothing. Ultimately, the study concluded that not only did venting not decrease the participants' anger, but it in fact increased their aggression more than any other group. Venting was literally worse than doing nothing. As the study concluded, venting to reduce anger is like using gasoline to put out a fire. It only feeds the flame. And to cite Psychology Today again, in regularly venting your frustration or anger, you're in effect practicing it, and thereby becoming more skilled at it. Through sheer repetition, anger can become easier and easier to trigger. If you repeatedly use venting to justify and validate yourself, and this pattern becomes as automatic as it is self-reinforcing, you can see how it would actually increase the odds of your ending up living a life of heightened stress, if not downright misery. So the question then becomes, by putting so much energy into wishing terrible fates on this fictional puppy, or really whatever other fictional inconsequential things we get mad about, is it possible that we're instead exercising, maintaining, and increasing our own capacity to hate? Perhaps in ways that can eventually extend to real life, even ultimately be harmful to our own mental health? Does it unintentionally make us more capable of hating in general? Maybe he's just a stupid cartoon puppy, and being mad about it and continuing to reiterate over and over again just how much we want him to die isn't exactly doing anything good for anybody, including us. And maybe that applies to a lot of inconsequential stuff in our fandoms that we might get hung up on. There are plenty of very important things in the world that are worth directing anger at, even still within the scope of media and fandom, especially when trying to make a real positive change. But when that anger is targeted towards things we claim to love, at an unproblematic character or element that just rubbed us the wrong way, it's likely increasing our hate and aggression in spaces where we're supposed to be finding entertainment, community, and joy, and that can't be good for our health. We all have our own personal Scrappies, those pesky elements of things and even people we otherwise love, aspects that we just can't stand and wish would go away. But sometimes those things never will, and as long as they aren't hurting anybody, that's okay. We're allowed to get angry, and of course there's always room for constructive criticism, but when it comes to that rage, the full-on hate that comes with hate watching and non-stop ranting and complaining and 2-hour YouTube videos about how something is awful, the harassment and insults and breaking people down and wishing actual death, well, it's probably worth asking, what's the point? It's possible, even healthy, to look at the things you love with a critical eye, to think about it and see it from different perspectives. But if you already know you hate it and why you hate it, and especially if plenty of people already agree with you, then why not spare yourself the misery? Spend your time engaging with and thinking about stuff you actually enjoy. Because I assure you, no matter how much of a nightmare the world around us can be, there's always something that can bring you joy.
You look like you've got something to say. Do you?
Yes, I certainly do. Hello there, Itchy. I know there's a lot of people who don't like me and wish I would go away. And I think we got off on the wrong foot. I know I can come off a little proactive, and for that I'm sorry. But if everyone could find a place in their hearts for the little dog nobody wanted, I know we can make them laugh and cry until we grow old together.